afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Toon. I'm the LOC's Communications Director, sitting in again this week for Patty Mulvihill, our Executive Director. Welcome to this week's legislative webinar. Time is of the essence here, so we want to dive into the programming pretty quick, but I got a couple of quick housekeeping issues. First, if you have not yet done so, please make sure your microphone is muted. And second, we will promptly end this webinar at 1 o'clock. Also, I've put some instructions in the chat right now for you to update your screen name, please, to include the city you represent. Again, look in the chat for that, for those instructions. A lot of information to cover. Here's a quick overview. We're going to start with the latest sort of 10,000-foot view of what's happening as the session wraps up from lobbyist Ariel Nelson. Then we'll hear from Scott Winkles, who has a floor vote to get to, so we'll get to him right away. He'll be talking about Measure 110 reform and recreational immunity. Ariel will come back then and have update on the governor's housing production package, also funding for affordable housing and shelter support. She'll also talk to us about a bill regarding Housing Oregon's workforce and UGB expansion. Finally, we'll also hear from LOC lobbyist Lindsay Tennis. She'll talk about the bill for industrial site readiness funding and the RSIS extension and technical changes bill. Because of the volume of the information we need to get to, we will hold all questions till the end, except with Scott, because he does have to leave to go to, I think, a floor vote. So we'll get rolling right away. Ariel, I see, is on. So Ariel, why don't you start us off? I think we can see the finish line. Is that safe to say, as we're about a week, maybe 10 days away from sine die?
That's right. Thanks, Kevin. As a reminder, the constitutional last possible day for sine die is March 10th. So this week was really the final push for a lot of measures. And I think we'll see, sine die sometime next week, depending on who you talk to. I know Scott doesn't like to make predictions. But what you saw this week was kind of the final push to get bills out of policy committees. The second chamber deadline was yesterday. So really the only committees that are open now are the budget, ways and means committees, and then the rules committees in both chambers and the finance and revenue committees in both chambers have special rules. So kind of winding down the policy discussions, there's been a lot of activity that you'll hear about in our focus updates and from the ways and means on the budget side. And of course, House Bill 4002 has really been what's been dominating kind of the attention in the legislature. And Scott's going to get into more detail about that. And I want to let him do that because he wants to go watch the vote on the Senate floor. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you so much. And actually, I just tuned into the Senate and they've adjourned. We'll be coming back at 2 now. So we're in that phase of where we only think we know what's going to happen in the cap right now. So big news in Measure 110 reform. This week, we saw hearings and work sessions on House Bill 4002 in the Joint Addictions Committee. The bill came out with only a couple of no votes of committee. It was on the House floor yesterday. Came out of that chamber on a 51-7 vote with a couple of absentees, excused members. The bill is really what the coalition of included the league, the sheriffs, the chiefs, the DAs, or the police unions came on board later on. It's what we asked for, really. I got to it answered the questions in a couple of different ways. It creates the unclassified misdemeanor that's with opportunities for a person to divert or deflect prior to booking. It puts all of the sanctions are on the back end. So a person might be booked on that offense, but they wouldn't actually get any sanctioning units unless they were out of compliance with the diversion program or were revoked for some other reason. Does give police officers the tool to interdict to see the drugs that they see on the streets in a way that we can't do currently under Measure 110. And a couple of really big changes I don't know have gotten as much play, but are certainly important, is it made it easier for police and prosecutors to pursue drug dealers. We had an adverse court ruling called Boyd and Hubble that really impaired the ability of police officers and prosecutors to prove these cases. So that should change dramatically. We also have sentence enhancements for people who deal close to parks, close to homeless shelters, and treatment facilities. There's already a sentence enhancement for people who deal close to schools, which is why that's not in the bill. We had a couple questions on that. Expanded the holds to 72 hours. The point of we issued an 11-point document. We feel like most of those have been covered right now. The one outstanding issue is in a different bill related to group home siting that we expect to get out of the Rules Committee to take up. And we're working diligently to ensure that we're going to have enough treatment beds to for this population. There's also a companion funding bill, House Bill Bill 5204 that funded a whole bunch of shovel-ready projects. Honestly, I've not had a chance to digest that bill this week. It's been quite the adventure in the Capitol, but we will link that in the post-bill summary, post-session summary. You can see if there's what projects have been funded in your areas. All in all, this is a really good outcome. We're feeling very confident about the vote in the Senate this afternoon at 2 o'clock. And then from there, it's just straight to the governor's desk. I will note with a tremendous amount of irony that one of the advocacy groups has informed the legislature they intend to bring a suit because the fiscal impacts of House Bill 4002 on cities and counties were not taken into or were not included in the fiscal impact statement. And I'm interested that they are now concerned about the fiscal health of cities after the marijuana money was swept and delayed in disbursement to service providers now. So that's we'll keep you posted on those developments. So all in all, we feel like we're in a really good position on House Bill on 110, that 110 priority for this session. The next bill of priority 1576, this bill is the Civil Omnibus Bill, and it contains the rec community fix that we were looking for. It is a temporary fix. It's on its way to the Senate, to the House floor after passing out of House Judiciary yesterday morning. Came out of the Senate on a very strong vote. I think we had 2 no votes from members present, and then expecting a strong, we're not worried about the vote count on the House side either, so we will have that protection. There will be a work group in the interim to come up with a more durable solution to this issue. This isn't the first time the league has had to address recreational immunity after adverse court decisions, and there is a desire to put this issue to bed once and for all. There is the best we can under the circumstances. So with that, good news this week. And I will turn it back over to Kevin.
All right, thank you, Scott. So you can stick around for our regular Q&A. Okay, yep. Sounds good. Thank you. We're going to move to Ariel Nelson. She has several bills to talk to you about. So Ariel, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. It definitely is kind of a hurry up and wait scenario going on in the Capitol. One of the things I should have mentioned at the start is that we're seeing this session is an agreement to suspend the rules, which is a procedural thing where you have the Republicans agreeing to suspend the rules so that bills don't have to be second read and go through different kind of procedural hurdles before they get actually a final reading and vote and debate on the House or Senate floor. So we're seeing things move pretty smoothly and in some cases very quickly. So you're seeing rule suspension to move House Bill 4002 forward. And that also happened with some major housing bills this week. So some bills we've talked about before, Senate Bill 1537, that is the governor's housing production package. That bill, as well as Senate Bill 1530, which is basically a major budget funding bill for a variety of housing programs and a variety of things. I'll get into more detail. Both of those, as well as House Bill 4134, which is the Housing Oregon's Workforce Bill, a bill that Representative Elmer championed that had some affordability restrictions and some programmatic framework for some specific infrastructure investments in specific cities. All 3 of those were heard in the Ways and Means committees this week. And then we saw the two Senate bills, the governor's bill and the major budget bill, immediately went to the Senate floor the next day. So those passed yesterday, both Senate Bill 1537 and Senate Bill 1530, which means they are headed to the House. The House adjourned yesterday after passing House Bill 4002, and they're not meeting again until Monday. So we expect things to pick back up on Monday and continue moving. The Housing Oregon's Workforce Bill, House Bill 4134, we believe is not on the fast track, which means it doesn't mean it's not going to pass. It's on its way to the House floor, but they did not put it on the rule suspension kind of fast track list. So we expect to see that receive a vote in the House next week. So those were the major movements on housing bills, again, through the Ways and Means process. Because they went to Ways and Means, they don't need to go to a policy committee on the other side. They just go straight to both floors because that's a joint committee that hears them. The last bill I'll share an update on is House Bill 4026 or 4026. This was a bill that received an amendment in the House Rules Committee kind of late in the session to clarify the existing urban growth boundary expansion process. And it's a pretty simple bill. It just clarifies that urban growth boundary approval decisions made by a local government are not eligible for referral to the ballot. This is related to somewhat related to a situation happening in the city of North Plains that I know many of you are aware of, but also something that the league is concerned will be a trend going forward as cities are looking at needed growth to meet our housing goals across the state. So that bill cleared a major hurdle. It was amended and passed out of the House Rules Committee early this week, and then it actually passed the House floor yesterday. I think there were only 5 no votes, very little discussion. We anticipate that the Senate's ready for this bill. It's going to go to Senate Rules and a floor vote, and we hope that'll be fast tracked next week, and we'll be looking for that on Monday. And that's it from my end, Kevin.
All right, Ariel, thank you. Quick reminder to Ariel, Scott, and any of our other lobbyists that are on the webinar today, please put your contact information in the chat. And up next, we're going to hear from Lindsay Tennis, another one of our lobbyists who has information on industrial lands, an industrial lands bill, as well as the RSIS extension bill. Lindsay, you're on.
Thanks, Kevin. So 2 bills related to the same program saw significant movement this week. House Bill 4042 was passed out of the House Revenue Committee unanimously after it had already been passed out of the House Economic Development Committee unanimously and now sits in Ways and Means. And this bill extends the state's industrial site readiness program, the RISAS program, and allocates $40 million to capitalize the industrial land loan fund. We've had a industrial site loan fund on the state's books since 2013, but it's never received any funding. And this is a redraft of a bill that didn't pass last year. And this program actually expired last year, and Business Oregon had already stopped accepting applications for it. So it's extending, but it's also reauthorizing because right now the program has already expired. And then the same sunset extension lives in a different bill, Senate Bill 1526. So this will have the same sunset extension of the program as well as a number of technical changes. And the reason that we needed a different vehicle for it is just procedurally. Sometimes when a bill goes to Ways and Means, the policy in it, the bill itself can appear dead, but the budget allocation goes into a big omnibus bill. So we needed to make sure that we had the sunset extension in a bill that wasn't going to Ways and Means. And I want to thank Representative Nathanson and Senator Meek for agreeing to have us have the sunset extension in the revenue omnibus bill, which passed out of committee. And, it's usually sort of a non-controversial technical fix bill that sails through. So we should, in all likelihood, see the sunset extension this year and at least the technical changes that will make the program function better.
All right. Thank you very much, Lindsay. We're going to move now to our question and answer portion. The mechanics of this, the way it works is either raise your hand here on Zoom. You should be able to see that option on screen, or you can submit a question in the chat. Please do remember that we have some limited time here, especially because we're into crunch time of the session. So Q&A is an opportunity for you to ask direct questions of our team and get answers and feedback. While feedback from membership is certainly necessary and important, just because of our time constraints, we ask that any comments be submitted to the LOC via email or in the chat. So I am not seeing any hands raised, and I am seeing a question. Well, actually, I don't think I am seeing a question. No. Okay. This could be a first. We always go through this little process of who will be the first, or will there be a question as we are a week out. I do actually want to ask one question, which I think is just a broad interest, perhaps of Ariel or Scott. When it comes to our timeline, there's been some hinting that we might actually see the session end before next weekend. Again, Scott, we know your sensitivity to making predictions, so we're not really going to put you on the spot for that. But could you perhaps, either one of you, shed light on the likelihood that we will be done before the constitutional sine die on the, Sunday the 10th?
I am clinging to Sunday the 10th, largely because nothing creates disappointment like expectation. So I think there's a chance Friday.
So Scott, you're going with the expect disappointment and you'll never be disappointed philosophy, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a bleak worldview, but it can hold true in this process. I think we have a few more things that we could bubble up and percolate and complicate things going into sine die. So I'm going to stick with the 10th, but my more optimistic friends are saying Friday.
Ariel, any color commentary you want to drop?
I think Friday is what the Senate is aiming for, at least what I heard. I think that's, fairly realistic. I don't think we've had as typical sessions the last few years for a number of reasons. But it was, could be typical that a day or two before the paperwork. If we've mentioned that before, every bill as it transfers committee, there's fiscal paperwork, there's committee paperwork, that all takes time. And so even if they come to an agreement and they suspend all of the rules and fast track everything, that stuff has to still play catch up. There's still a few conversations happening in the rules committees. One of the biggest signs to know that they're really done is when those end of session budget bills pop out. There's a program change bill for agency allocations and a Christmas tree capital construction bill. So, there was a number of cities that we were very happy to see get direct funding in Senate Bill 1530 and in the Housing Organs Workforce Bill. There's still a chance we could see some direct allocations pop out in that capital construction bill. So that's something we'll be watching for closely. Once those kind of get posted in Ways and Means, we know it's pretty close. Those are the final things that usually get done. So I think Friday is possible. It could be a little bit earlier, but you never know. So they never get it done as early as they want to. Even when they think they're done, they've got to get through the procedural stuff.
So for our purposes of this webinar, is it safe to say we're likely to have information to pass along a week from today?
Absolutely. I mean, we'll either be done or almost done. And I think the end will be very much in sight by Friday.
So for our participants, we have close to 175 folks on this webinar and have had great participation throughout. We are most likely to do a last webinar next Friday. And then we will have essentially a wrap up of the entire short session in one of the following weeks. We do have a couple of questions to get to. Lindsay Tennis actually messaged me directly, said that she got a direct question via the chat, but had some information to share. So I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay if she's still with us.
Yeah, thank you. I got a good question in the chat that I'll just answer for everyone. So the industrial site readiness program that I talked about that we're seeking the sunset extension for, we had originally asked for a 10-year sunset extension, which had been more consistent in prior sessions of what we had received. we are getting a 6-year sunset extension because the chairs of the Revenue Committee wanted to align that with the regular 6-year review process that all tax expenditures are under, and that is applied to both tax credits that are coming out of the state's general fund and property tax exemptions. The RISAS program is sort of different. It's not a typical tax expenditure. It's an income tax sharing sort of financing tool where cities can enter into an agreement with Business Oregon. They make all of the upfront costs to develop the infrastructure of the industrial site. And then once jobs start getting generated on the site and that data is captured, 50% of the income tax that's generated for the state gets returned back to the city that has an agreement with Business Oregon. So it's, the money only goes back to the local government if there is proven job growth on the site. So the program is different than like a typical tax credit. But we took the 6-year sunset because it was what we were offered. And so we'll come back to talk about this bill either 2027, 28, or 29, because the bill will be extended through 2029.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay. I see a hand up from Peter Hall from the city of Haines. Peter, go ahead.
Just want to know when if these bills go through, when will they go into effect?
I can take that one, Counselor. So it's going to depend on the bill. At the top of every bill, I think it's a change this year where sometimes you had to read through the whole bill because some bills, like particularly large omnibus bills, different portions have different effective dates. Some bills go into effect January 1st of next year. Some it's a certain amount of time from when the governor signs the bill. So that is a detail that we make sure to put in our legislative report, the LOC legislative report. And we also typically will do a shorter list of bills that have specific action items by virtue of passing or going into effect that cities need to know. And we really clearly put those out there for you. But if you've got a question about a specific bill, we're happy to follow up offline and kind of show you where to see the effective date. I don't know if Scott or Lindsay, if you have anything to add to that.
The rec community bill does have an emergency clause on it, so it will go into effect on the governor's signature. And then House Bill 4002 does have multiple effective dates. The unclassified misdemeanor takes effect in September. But there are other aspects of the bill that will implement earlier to prepare for that date. So getting money out for deflection programs, that sort of thing will take place much, much earlier.
And Councilor Hall and others, it is an opportunity to also advise that the league will produce an extensive bill summary document. It'll be an electronic document in the weeks following the session, and information regarding effective dates should be included in the summary of those bills. I do see a question in the chat. This is from Paul Thompson. I believe he's from Lane Council of Governments, and he's asking about a couple of bills that I think are in Jim's portfolio. So Ariel may look to you on this if you can. He's asking if Jim McCauley, our legislative director, unable to join us for this call today, but Paul is asking if Senate Bill 1519 and or 1543 are likely to advance.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that with the caveat that Jim is our transportation lead. So feel free to follow up with him offline. He is on a plane right now, and I think he is available on email. Quickly looked up those bills. No, I don't believe, the short answer is no, don't believe those will be advancing at all this session. I would characterize those as conversation starters. We often see bills introduced that may not have political passage, but certainly are touching on policy conversations. For this one in particular, if you're not familiar, my understanding is there was a recent lawsuit from the trucking industry for the state that they had been overcharged weight per mile taxes. Most users of the roads pay that through the gas tax. And Oregon is one of a few states that has a weight per mile tax. So that lawsuit is kind of playing out how they're going to deal with that. But there has been a demand or a request from some to just get rid of the weight per mile tax completely, and figure out how to resolve that. All of that said, we do expect, I think Jim has shared this, 2025 will be a major transportation session. They're expecting to do a major transportation package for kind of the overall kind of existential funding of how ODOT is funded, looking at, a road user and weight per mile and gas tax and all of that. So can kind of consider those bills as previews for that discussion in 2025. But for more details, I would definitely reach out to Jim.
And Paul, I did put Jim, I attempted to put Jim's contact information in the chat. It got a little garbled, but there's a second little bubble in there with his email address if you want to email Jim directly on that. Thank you, Ariel. I am not seeing anything else in terms of chat or hands raised. Go ahead, Ariel.
Oh, another one just popped up for me, I think, in the chat. Could something like affordable housing preservation funding be included in the Christmas tree bill? Are there process restrictions on the types of provisions that can be in those bills? So for the program change bill, that's typically agency allocations. Christmas tree can kind of have anything in it for the most part. I don't believe we're going to see preservation funding in there. It's not sounding like that's something that made it onto the final list for preserving existing affordable housing, unfortunately. But that's also a never say never. There have been some last minute budget things that have popped out in these end of session budget bills in the past. So I don't want to say no, like completely, but it's not looking likely, unfortunately. I think the conversation, from what I understood from both the governor's office and the legislature, was that significant investments were made in 2023, and they expect to continue those types of larger investments in 25. And they were looking at more kind of immediate, not that preservation needs aren't immediate for some of these situations, but and I'll just double check, Scott, Lindsay, if there's anything more procedurally about the end of session bills that we should share for context that I missed.
Okay. All right, seeing nothing here in the chat, we'll just give it the old going once, going twice, and I believe we're done. So a couple quick closing announcements. Plan to be with us next Friday at noon for what will likely be our final webinar of the session. As I mentioned before, we will actually do a wrap-up webinar in the weeks following. The LOC Bulletin, our weekly electronic newsletter, is out. You should have that in the latest edition in your email inbox. It'll have more in-depth information on these bills that we've discussed today. And a final plug for the LOC's spring conference, scheduled for April 25th and 26th in Klamath Falls. If you have not registered, there is still time to get in at the early bird rate, so please do so. I want to thank everybody for joining us, as well as our team for being here during a very busy time in the Capitol, and I wish you all a wonderful weekend.